All is self. This is to me the highest maxim. It's very short. You could just pull it right out on yourself. And what it has to do with is recognizing that what you don't often like externally, you may find a portion of within. And this came from what seemed to be almost like a never ending battle with what I call they, where there's always someone to blame. There's always someone that is responsible for the sequences of the existence that you and others may find themselves in. And after a while, I realized that within the dualistic flow, though, there was still always the drawback of just going into duality and then losing energy with dealing with they, since it was so non-descriptive. And I felt that if we truly saw this design, we would realize that everything, including they, was all a part of this creation and thus all a part of self. And as being an originator, that every single thing came from within first. And that is where the term all is self was coined. And that's what brought me personally into a greater understanding of the universe. That's the created world around me. And of course, the innerverse and the depths of the innerverse and the parts that I'm yet to explore and to discover in myself, but see the reflections every day when I'm looking into or peering into the lens of this reality. And again, these powerful maxims can take you a long way, because sometimes when you're getting into conflicts, even with yourself, you have to remind yourself of these mantras and be able to really stand in them. And the next one that I have is actually, it brings one to the complete threshold of standing in what they've learned and who they truly are, rather than the continuous repeat and the play. And this one's a bit longer. It can be phrased in many different ways. It is summarized as the less attachment you have, the more you are free. It actually seems like common sense. And that's why I laugh at the world. I laugh at myself. And it's because, when you really, really dig in on like something like the Tao, the Bhagavad, when if you ever take down one of those Maxim books that are entire systems within themselves, you'll always see the same underlining component. And at times when I see others around me and they're going nuts, but they say they're so learned, I always think of that, are we reading the same stuff? Because pretty much in all of these ancient systems, they always say the same thing, that if you get too attached, then that becomes your prison. And it's kind of like a deeper introspection, because it's actually proof that possession in this world can weigh a bit more than the desire to be ultimately free. And I'll say that again, that the energy of possession in this world can sometimes weigh more than the desire to be free. And just in examining that, we also know that attaching to things is literally, it definitely feels external. And it's basically when something else is responsible, even for your happiness, or responsible for your validation of self. And they often say that because we're still in a physical reality and everything in the physical reality will perish, that we sometimes set ourselves up for suffering when we become attached to too many things. And then we begin to watch those things pass away. And instead of joy of knowing that that's going into the all collective unified field, we feel like that somehow that we've lost something. And there's that aspect to it. And then there's the other aspect where we've been taught some pretty interesting habits. And as I sit back and I look at the reality and how it instructs at times, I can see entire demographics that have been taught the tactics even of possession, to actually feel like we own something or someone and that it belongs to us. Whether this is the land or the property, which we're just custodians of, or whether this is a significant other, which we just have the opportunity and the time and the space to share a unique connection with that person. But ultimately still remembering that what the master has done that seems a little bit different from where others are is that they've actually got an opportunity in life to remove themselves from the desires of everything around them in order to actually be truly free and see what that's like. And then from there, never setting up any more idols or false images in front of themselves. I'll say that again because it's almost like biblical that, once you've been freed and you're introduced to the real God, which is you, that you don't go set up any more of these idols on the altar to make attachments with and become possessed by all over again. It is a repetitive cycle, though. You'll actually notice it in so many stages of life. There will be things from children to marriage to a new job to the new car and all these different things that will present themselves from time to time, and they will demand and they will ask for your control. And what we have to be as mindful custodians of life is to realize that I can assist you in this process of the experience, but I myself belong to no one, as you don't either. You definitely don't belong to me. And in that there's so much power, because when you start stepping into 60, 70 years old, if this has been performed properly, then you will be easily released from this carcass, which is only preparing your next butterfly stage. However, if you're clinging to it because of those attachments, then time draws nigh and you will feel the burn of just the troubles that come with thinking that something is yours, when in fact it actually belongs to everything. And that actually brings me to the point of just that process in itself of actually making the journey to know self. And where that comes in is just an actual physical, what is something that I've actually done that I know as facts has changed my life. Now, there's so many things on these lists, but I do like to really crystallize them to say, well, it was still because of that was like the wellspring of all of the other things that came forward after that. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying, hey, if you have some wisdom or a gem to deliver, this is what we want. And for me, this was actually leaving the country. This is, again, 3 maxims. This is the final one. Leaving the country by myself. So if you go with your friends, it's spring break time, we're going to Cancun. That's not leaving the country, Woody. You still around them. They got the whole field. You know what I mean? Like, the universe is very interesting. It was something that, I was laying in with the universe the other night. And, I got to use a term, so we'll call the supreme being. The supreme being comes through and is like, hey, the supreme being is a frequency, right? And I was like, how so? Ready for the dialogue. How so? And it said, it's a frequency, because that's why they tell you that there's really nothing new under the sun, because everything that you can think of is here, because it's actually a frequency. And what you have to realize is that, trust me, if you were on a very vast, free level, the last thing you will be wanting to do is jump into a limited vessel. And the more that you come into an expansion and awareness with yourself, the more you actually become the radio or the thing that can tune in to these frequencies becoming a part of your field, because that's why we're everywhere. And that's, of course, the supreme being is indeed everywhere. It is broadcasting all the time. It's just about whether you can receive it. And if you got these limitations, that's the last thing a completely free being would want to do, is jump into some limitation. And I started laughing because I started thinking about other things that I would probably rather just swim around the ocean as a big, giant, great white, or something like that, with all that power and muscle and cartilage and all that kind of stuff, rather than jumping in, the streets, downtown, where somebody's drawing some circles on the ground and chanting and looking like they haven't ate or seen the sun for about 2 or 3 weeks. So you see, it's about resonance and it's about vibration, and actually becoming the resonance or the house or the temple for the frequencies in which that you want to make a part of your vibratory field. And again, when you're not necessarily leaving your space, then you're always in this comfort field. I'm actually in a challenge right now for me to keep it moving, to actually keep exploring and keep linking and keep connecting, versus, even the building phase where we kind of become more grounded and rooted into what's going on around us and we build from there. But, we are trees that move. It's very important to remember this. We are trees that move. We're the trees that can pick up our roots and walk. We are the stars that are not fixed. We wander. And in that, there's an ebb and flow to our life that's different than other beings. And we need to be aware of that, because that actually brings me really to the icing on top of the whole thing, which is actually supposed to be the beginning, but the beginning is yet the end. And this was just an awareness as I was watching this simulator. There's this channel on YouTube called 2-Minute Papers that I watch from time to time. And it's really the overall growth of GTP3, or artificial intelligence, or cognitive behavior within neural networks. And it just basically means that how something comes to the process of thinking. And again, as I mentioned before, this becomes very useful for predicting and also looking into the past and seeing how long it may take for certain things to happen, especially under certain conditions. And in this context, they were looking at a forest, and they were subjecting, or what you would say is just an open area of dirt in a mountainous region, and just the process of when it would become a forest. And they timed that out in AI to about 1,500 years. So for those that see forests drop in one night, know that that forest took about 1,500 years, if it's fully developed, to get to that stage. And it showed how the shrubs start coming up first, and then the whole competition is actually really for exposure to the sun. And I found that very interesting, because it actually is for sure a parallel to how things are designed within this actuality, not so much as reality, but the actuality where the exposure to the sun, or the exposure to all there is, the data, the information, the codes, etc., is what is allowing you to grow up. Right? And this growing upwards is the adepthood within itself. When you start seeing a different person, like you can't keep waking up seeing the same and being the same thing and expect to actually remain connected with all that you truly are. You must see the metamorphosis and actually witness the metamorphosis within yourself, and stand into the truth and let go of the scaffolding and the programs that were propping you up, in order to allow you to have the contrasts that are necessary for you to come into realization of who you truly are. But make no mistake that there is something that goes on in the forest that you need to pay attention to, and that's when trees start blocking out other trees' light. And it basically showed that, especially when you see like these forests, like where you see all the pine trees, these are actually places where whatever the forest originally was there, where it's completely eradicated. Because when something is completely eradicated, what then starts after that 1,500-year process, what then starts is this survival of the fittest for a while, where every single plant is somewhat in a competition for the light. And in this, the pine trees, after a certain point of the shrubs' growth, begin to dominate the entire area. And you will see that forest of only pine trees. And then they have one bigger brother, which is the spruce tree, which, if getting a hold of roots and things properly, will actually end up dwarfing those pine trees over time. And when you look in Costa Rica, however, which is in itself more of a naturally evolving forest, because there's constant flora and fauna, birds dropping seeds and these kind of things. And, you know, just more of a spread, if you may. You see different types of trees, many of them edible, that are actually within the forest versus, again, forests that are covered with one tree. But what is the maxim to actually extract from this? And it's just that you should never let anything block your light. That you should be aware that as we go forward into this reality infinitely, you're going to have forms around you constantly that are growing larger, if you may, in their own way. Like I see in this world that we have many giants, if you may, whether they're the owners of corporations, whether they have magnetized hundreds or thousands of people, whatever the case may be, that for them, the reality is beginning to get large and they are having more exposure. And what you always have to be mindful of, especially within your emotions and within, if you feel depressed or anything like that, is that you need to shine, you need to stand up, and don't let anything block your light. And to remember that there is always a competition at times in the jungle for that level of exposure. But you probably are the spruce in this whole thing, meaning that you can always dial into just making sure that you don't put anything above you. And again, that leads into all of these maxims about not getting possessed and many of these other things, that nothing comes before you and your connection to the source. As long as it's you and the source, until you merge and become the source, everything will be perfect. When you put something in between you and the source and it starts blocking the light, then you will start seeing the decay factor within your own consciousness. And all of the wise books, I've read them all, pretty much say that. And now what it's time for us to always be available for as adepts is to do what is being told to you by your ancestors and by those who have already gone through the experience, and even by you yourself because of the experiences that you've been in.